Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on corporates and renewables, what alternatives to PPAs. So my name is Bérénice Lemblin, and I'm an event director at Green Power Global. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to welcome so many listeners to this afternoon's webinar. We have received over 550 registrations, which is a great testament to the excellent speakers we have participating and the importance of the subject area. So please be aware that this session is being recorded, and the link will be emailed to you shortly after the webinar is complete. So you will be able to listen again and share with your colleagues if you wish. Just to let you know a bit about Green Power Global. So it was founded in 2003 to accelerate the fight against climate change through creating live events. These are commercial events that focus on connecting senior level decision makers. Together we accelerate projects, we spread best practice and de-risk strategic decisions. Today's webinar takes place ahead of the first Corporate Energy Network Europe to be held at the Hotel Intercontinental in Paris on the 21st and 22nd of May 2019. So the Corporate Energy Network Europe will gather corporates and industrials, renewable energy project developers, utilities, banks, loan advisory firms to discuss the challenges and opportunities of the sourcing and procuring of renewable electricity. This will be done through our networking app and specialized workshops and roundtables on the topics targeted to the industry. Which brings me to today's webinar on corporates and renewables, what alternatives to PPAs. So with the increasing global pressure to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, corporations around the world have started setting up their own targets. Powering their operations with renewable energy is one of the steps to decarbonize their business, but the journey to achieving 100% electricity can be complex for corporates whose core focus isn't originally electricity. So recently, power purchase agreements, or PPAs, have attracted attention as an interesting choice for large corporates. But although the corporate PPA market is off to a good start, PPAs are not a solution for everyone and in every country, especially if you look at Europe, where regulation can sometimes be a barrier due to, for example, heavy financial support of the governments to renewable energy projects. So over the next hour, we will explore the following questions around alternative solutions for corporate sourcing of renewable energy. What other options are available to corporates to source renewable energy? What type of corporates should consider which solution? How can corporates ensure they choose the right solution to adapt to a specific regulatory environment while ensuring cost effectiveness? I feel extremely privileged to welcome three excellent speakers this afternoon to address this topic. Firstly, we welcome Jared Brastowski, a Secretary General of REX International. Jared works on the consumer-driven market for renewable electricity in Europe and around the world. He's a leading expert in the market for guarantees of origin and other electricity tracking instruments. Recently, Jared began the International REC Standard Foundation, which implements and standardizes attribute tracking system around the globe. Jared is an active member of a number of technical working groups and advises companies on issues related to attribute and emission accounting. We are then joined by Dirk van Everkoeven, who is Director Market at the Flemish Electricity and Gas Regulator. His goals are to follow up and, if need be, direct developments of the electricity, gas, renewable certificates and guarantees of origin markets. His work at REG also allowed him to take up several other interesting mandates, such as President at the Association of Issuing Bodies and Chair of the Council of European Energy Regulators Customer Empowerment Task Force. Finally, we are joined by Jean-Pierre Rich, who is currently the General Secretary of the Origin Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to help and motivate top managers to set ambitious energy efficiency objectives to their organizations. In 2017, with 2 associates and an investment fund, he has merged 3 existing companies to found Origin SAS, a new company dedicated to assisting companies and public organizations in reaching their ambitious objectives of energy performance. Each of those 3 speakers will take 5 to 10 minutes to present their views, following which we will take questions from our listeners. You can submit your questions via Twitter using hashtag CEN Europe or using the question box on the GoToWebinar bar to the right of your screen. Please don't be shy. We'll try and get through as many relevant questions as possible in this hour time frame. And with that, I shall now hand over to our first speaker, Jared Brasowski. Jared, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction there, and I appreciate being able to join in the webinar. Please feel free to just go right to my first slide. I don't have much time, so I think I'm going to just jump right into it. And that is, what are we really talking about? We're talking about liberalization of the electricity market. We're talking about giving consumers choice in their electricity product. The title of this webinar is Alternatives to PPAs, but PPAs are not necessarily a goal in and of itself. A PPA is nothing more than a long-term agreement for physical electricity and or the associated attributes. And if you're saying, what are the alternatives to PPAs? Well, there are lots of alternatives. You don't need to do a long-term agreement. You can just purchase guarantees of origin. You can purchase RECs. You can purchase IRECs. You can purchase it with various eco-labels or all these other sorts of things. But to even get into that question, what are PPAs, what are alternatives to PPAs, we first need to really do a bit of an overview. What are we talking about more generally? What we're talking about is the screen in front of you. It's about the electricity market. You have producers and you have consumers. A long time ago, we only had one choice in electricity. That was to buy electricity or not buy electricity. We would turn on the lights and we would get electricity, or we would turn off the lights and we wouldn't. It was your choice to purchase that electricity or not. In many countries around the world, there's a process of liberalization or deregulation in the electricity markets taking place, where electricity consumers don't just have a choice in how much electricity they purchase, but also who they purchase their electricity from. Of course, they can purchase this from specific electricity suppliers. In Europe, the regulations around choosing an electricity supplier are extremely robust, extremely supportive, and extremely good for the consumer. However, the choice in electricity product, what type of product did you purchase? Did you purchase coal? Did you purchase wind? Did you purchase nuclear? Did you purchase solar? Was it from a new device? Was it from an old device? Was it from a device somewhere else in the country? Was it a device from right next to your own house? Was it from a device in a neighboring country? All of these sorts of aspects are much less regulated. It's improving, and I think another speaker, probably Dirk, will talk a little bit about how this is improving in European legislation, but it still isn't at the same type of quality as the choice of electricity supplier. So what do? We work with standards, we work with best practices to make sure the instruments for consumer choice, the guarantee of origin in Europe, is well regulated and well founded. Next slide, please. The goal, of course, is that individual consumers can have choice over a specific type of electricity product. The consumers can slowly say, I'm taking responsibility for the origin of the electricity that I'm purchasing. I'm purchasing, in this slide, electricity from a wind device. We can also flip the coin a little bit with this discussion as well and say the consumers that are not purchasing renewables, the consumers that are not making an active choice to support the renewables market, that they are making a bad choice because they're purchasing, again, electricity of a source that you don't know. Please go to the next slide. And in Europe, how this all is regulated, the mechanism for choosing renewable electricity or not, is based upon the guarantee of origin. The guarantee of origin is a European standardized system. You'll see that the dark blue countries are standardized with the AIB's European Energy Certificate System, which is a list of rules and regulations that ensures that every guarantee of origin, every megawatt hour of renewable electricity that's produced can be consumed by a consumer in the same way across Europe. This is a very important, and Dirk van Everkorn, I'm sure, will talk more about this in his presentation. But I wanted to make the statement that the guarantees of origin, if you could click to the next slide, is only one of many different developing international standards at this point in time. The guarantee of origin is not at all developing in a bubble. These types of certificates, the guarantee of origin, they fall under what are called Energy Attribute Certificates, EACs. And EACs are developing in North America, and they're developing around the world as well through different national governments or through different stakeholder-led standards, such as the IREC standard. So this phenomenon is not at all European, and the phenomenon phenomenon of PPAs is also not at all European. It's very much a global phenomenon that I'm sure most everyone on the call recognizes today. But what I want to make sure is that a PPA is the same in every jurisdiction. A PPA is based upon two fundamental principles: a long-term agreement for physical electricity or a long-term agreement for the associated attributes, the rights to prove that you've purchased renewables from a specific electricity source. And in that instance, a PPA, even though it is a very specific topic at this point in time, is not at all a new topic. This is a topic that has been around for many, many years. There's been long-term agreements done in the guarantee of origin market dating back already 10 years ago. So as you see these markets developing, and developing they are, you are going to see that the different ways in which these mechanisms are used, the guarantee of origin or the REC in the US or the IREC standard or other types of REC mechanisms around the world, are going to be used in different ways as well. And one of the many ways in which they're used is in a long-term agreement that is often called a power purchase agreement when the off-taker is a corporate entity. Please go to the next slide. In the end, what we're looking for, and what my organization is doing, is we're trying to work towards a world where every consumer is responsible for the type of electricity that they purchased. The slide that you see before you, for those of you that are familiar with the European market, will see this as full disclosure. Essentially, every megawatt hour that is produced on the grid is consumed by a specific individual consumer. That means some consumers are going to be responsible for choosing wind and solar and hydro, but other consumers are going to be responsible for choosing high coal, high carbon content electricity. And it's their choice to not have purchased those RECs from wind or solar. The reason they didn't do that is likely because of a higher price or likely because of a limited availability, but they still have to be responsible for their choice of purchasing a high carbon product. And this is something that we're working towards, and this is what this guarantee of origin system is all about. When you as a stakeholder consume renewable electricity as part of a long-term agreement, whether that's through a PPA or another mechanism, you're essentially guaranteeing that you are not going to be in the category of high emission producers for the length of that agreement. And that is, of course, the goal of this as well, to support the development of renewable technologies by increasing the value of the renewable technologies on the market. Now, before I finish my presentation, I just want to describe a little bit about REX International. I've described now a bit about this webinar, of course, and a bit about our organization. REX International is a nonprofit members organization. We have more than 150 members from all over the electricity sector in Europe, but also increasingly around the world. And we organize an annual event that really goes into the details of the guarantee of origin market, the REC market, and the IREC market around the world. This meeting is going to be organized on March 12th to 13th in Amsterdam. It's called the REC Market Meeting, and this year it's going to be titled Markets Driving Growth in Renewables. You can find more information about this on the website, REC Market Meeting, recmarket.eu, or you can go to LinkedIn and look at REC Market Meeting 2019. If you have any other information, you can ask me as well. One last thing I would like to say is there's many, many very good organizations that are working on these topics right now. And if you're interested in getting more involved or having more information, there's a number of different organizations in which I would very much encourage you to go and speak to. The resource platform is a good example of a platform that's working on these aspects and discussions as well, specifically when it comes to PPAs. They're very knowledgeable. REX International, ourselves, we're a good organization, and you're welcome to come to us at any time with questions on the developments in these markets. And there's many other organizations, including the members of REX International, 150 stakeholders, 150 members who are very knowledgeable on these topics and are more than willing to take your questions at any time, of course. So I'll finish it there. I think that I'm a little bit over time, so my apologies for that. I tried to move rather quickly in the short time given, but I'm more than willing to take questions after this as requested. So thank you everyone for listening to me, even though it was a bit one-sided at this point in time, but we'll have more dialogue later in the call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jared, for this great information. And I will now hand over to our next speaker, Dirk van der Koewen. I'm just unmuting you, Dirk. The floor is yours now.
Yes, thank you, Berenice. Thank you for the kind introduction. I need to stress that I am speaking today on behalf of AIB, the Association of Issuing Bodies, and I will be speaking about the AIB's activities. And also, thank you to Jared for setting the scene very clearly. I can almost seamlessly pick up on his introduction. Next slide, please. And I would like to begin by introducing a very important concept, which is the fuel mix or the grid mix, because once electricity is put on the grid, it cannot be distinguished whether this electricity is coming from wind turbines or solar plants or coal-fired plants or nuclear plants. So it's impossible to package or label electricity on the grid. And that, next slide please, brings us to a situation which is quite similar to the first slide that Jared showed. If you have a supplier which is supplying electricity from the grid to consumers on the right of the picture, of course, if this electricity supplier would be less than honest, things can get really complicated, because who is getting the electricity from the wind turbine? Is it the household on the bottom, or is it the company, the corporate consumer on top? If the supplier is not honest about this, it can create quite some confusion. So next slide, please. The question how to make green electricity reliable, the answer to that question is guarantees of origin. The only way you can really be sure that you are using green electricity coming from renewable sources is that there is a parallel tracking system, a so-called book and claim system in economic terms. And in the electricity sector, this is the guarantee of origin. And the issuing body is, of course, a very crucial role, because they are responsible for the trustworthiness of the system. And that brings me to the organization I'm talking about, the Association of Issuing Bodies. Next slide, please. So this is about the same map as Jared also showed. I'm not going to go over each country. What is the Association of Issuing Bodies? We are a not-for-profit organization. Our members are mandated by their national governments to take the role of issuing body and to take on the responsibilities of the issuing bodies. Most of them are TSOs and regulators. Some market operators and some other companies also have this mandate in their country. Now, basically what AIB does revolves around two pillars. The first one has been mentioned by Jared, the EECS rules, the European Energy Certificate System rules, which is a rule book which all of our members need to apply. And we regularly audit our members to ensure that they follow in their day-to-day practices the rules of our rule book. This has enormous advantages in terms of the fact that you can transfer a guarantee of origin from Norway to Spain or from Ireland to the Czech Republic without any concern about what does this instrument represent. Is it trustworthy? Is it something I can rely on? This is all being dealt with by the EECS rules being applied as a de facto standard. The second pillar of AIB's activities is the AIB Hub, which is a IT platform to which all of the registries, these are the databases of our members, are connected, so that in a very cost-efficient way these guarantees of origin can indeed be transferred from one register to another, and in that way also this facilitates a reliable but also a market-based functioning of the geo system. So this is basically what AIB is doing. We have 20 members now, and we hope to add at least 1 or 2 more in the coming year. So we are still pretty much growing. Next slide, please. So this is about the legal framework. The guarantee of origin is based on European legislation. It's in the directives, and it's basically something which is issued to a producer, then transferred or sold, and then eventually cancelled for use by a consumer or by a supplier in the name of its consumers. So by carefully controlling this system and overseeing this system, the issuing bodies ensure that there is no double counting, that there is no possibility to sell a megawatt hour of electricity from renewable sources twice, and therefore they make the system trustworthy to the consumer. Next slide, please. So why do we have guarantees of origin? I think basically guarantees of origin enable the consumer to make a choice, to have an active role in choosing electricity that comes from a specific origin. The system is set up to make consumers trust in the system because no double counting or greenwashing can take place. It allows consumers to be informed and understand how their decision in terms of sourcing electricity influences the planet. And therefore, I think Jared also mentioned it, it is a way to make consumers take responsibility for their impact. And this is then the international element, because we have this AIB area in which all the processes are aligned. We allow multinational consumers to feel or find the same practices in many different countries. Next slide, please. Coming to the sourcing of electricity by consumers, and most particularly by corporate consumers, we see that consumers are getting more and more picky. They know what they want better and better. And there are some trends that you can see. Some consumers want locally produced electricity. Some want electricity from certain sources like solar or wind or hydro because they have a preference and they can motivate that preference. Some like unsupported production or from recently built facilities. Now, what is interesting is that GOs as an instrument can facilitate all these choices because they are so rich in information. So if you buy a GO, you can make sure that it is a GO from solar, that it comes from a certain region, that it comes from a factory production facility which was only built in the past 5 years. All this information is available. Next slide, please. So this means that as a strategic instrument, GOs have come completely accepted by the corporates. And as a corporate, you can take different strategies. You can, if you have the room and the possibility, you can invest in your own production facilities. At that point, of course, you are sure what you're getting. You can invest in an off-site PPA, creating a sort of direct contractual link between you as a consumer and a production facility, or you can choose, as Jared said, to but to take the route of just making green procurement and using the guarantee of origin to make sure that you can claim to be using electricity from renewable sources. Now, a couple of years ago, this was maybe not fully understood, but it's more and more accepted by corporate consumers. So that's what I wanted to tell you in terms of what AIB is doing and what AIB is, how AIB is making sure that the guarantee of origin is indeed a strategic element in the whole picture of corporate sourcing from renewable sources. And I will be very glad to take your questions later in the seminar.
Great, thank you very much, Dirk, for your intervention. It's really interesting, and we got a lot of questions when you were talking, so that's great to see. I'll now hand over to our last speaker, Jean-Pierre Rich. Jean-Pierre Rich, it's now all yours. Jean-Pierre? Can you hear us? It seems that we have lost Jean-Pierre, so while we are waiting for him, why don't we do a couple of questions in the meantime. because we already have a lot. There are some very simple questions. So, for example, one of them for Dirk was just asking, does AIB operate outside of Europe? So that's just a straightforward question.
It's a very straightforward question. No, we are very closely linked to the European system and the European directive. So we have set our perimeter to, let's say, the wider European region, but we will not become active in the US or in Asia, for instance.
Okay.
Maybe, Dirk, if I could also just provide some aspects there. I mean, the attribute tracking systems, essentially guarantees of origin, RECs, or all these other EAC mechanisms that I was describing before, they're very heavily connected to national regulation. And in that context, you see quite frequently that as REC systems develop, they tend to develop either on a voluntary basis or on a compliance basis, but they always develop on that country-by-country basis. You could argue, however, because Europe is a single electricity market, that is a single set of rules and regulations that need to be followed. As such, it makes sense that the AIB, of course, standardizes these rules for the energy attribute certificates, the guarantee of origin, across Europe. But it would be unlogical in the same sense for them to do the same in other countries or other regions that have different rules or regulations in place. That being said, the EEC standard, the U.S. tracking systems, and the international REC standard, they all do similar functions in providing best practices to these developing systems around the world. You see many, many REC systems developing around the world, many of them on a voluntary basis, not being led by governments, but it's being done all based upon the best practices that are in place because of the good work that has been done in Europe, the US, and internationally. So I think the AIB is, even though they don't function outside of Europe, their principles are being taken outside of Europe to a much larger extent as well.
Sure.
Actually, on the topic of regions and this kind of things, Jared, there was a question for you about asking if consumers buying IREC issued by a renewable energy project in another, so can they buy it from another country basically or another grid? Is that possible?
Sure. Good question, and actually it has much less to do with the system than it has to do with the claims being made. So don't forget that a system, the guarantee of origin system in Europe, is nothing more than allowing the factual transfer of a product from one location to another location. This product happens to be produced electricity. The question remains, just like with a car, do you want a product that was produced in another country? If you're French, maybe you say, the only car I'm ever going to buy is a Renault. If you're in the U.S., you're going to say, listen, I just have a feeling I don't want to buy electricity that was, buy a car that was produced in Mexico for use in the United States. It's the exact same thing with renewable electricity. Every consumer is going to have a different perspective on this. The reality is, if you're purchasing solar electricity in the Netherlands, you could probably do it more cost efficiently to purchase solar electricity from Spain. Would that be accepted from most international criteria? Yes, it would be accepted. And the AIB would, of course, support you in those developments as well. However, maybe you as a company or you as a consumer say, you know, we don't want to purchase electricity from Spain. We only want to purchase it from the Netherlands. So to answer that question, you have to separate two things. One, the system of guarantees of origin and the system of EACs more internationally, IRECs and RECs more generally. They all allow for it. They all allow for cancellation to take place in any location that you wish. The question is what you as a consumer want to claim. And in the end, you are claiming the use of renewable electricity. So you may want to claim that electricity as coming from a source that's closer to your place of operation or not, as long as you've got a good justification for the reason you're making a claim.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Just trying again to see if Jean-Pierre is here now. I think I can see him here, but I'm not sure we can hear him. Jean-Pierre? Are you on the line now? Still can't hear. Let's go with another question still on the regional side of things. So someone is asking Dirk and Jared, for both of you, if you know what type of guarantees of origin or certificate is available in Morocco and Tunisia.
At this point in time, I know that I don't know of an active system in Tunisia at this point in time. I know that the international REC standard does allow for certificate issuance in Morocco at this point in time, and that would be eligible, of course, for use for Moroccan electricity production. What we have seen in the past as well, looking at the market players, is you have seen that certificates, for example, renewable electricity used in Spain is being consumed for use in Morocco. I don't necessarily personally, my personal perspective, and again, and this is again my personal perspective, is I don't think that that is best practice. I think it would be better to use renewable electricity produced in Morocco for use within Morocco in this specific instance. So in Tunisia, there is no developments that I know of at this point in time. In Morocco, there is a currently available system, and it's being organized by DCCE, that is the Dubai Carbon Center of Excellence, is organizing the attribute tracking system, or the guarantee of origin system, you could say, in Morocco at this point in time.
Great, thank you very much. And another question again about different countries. So what about Spain? What steps do I need to take to get GEOs for a company in Spain? What are the steps?
Dirk, I'll let you take that one.
Yes, thank you. Well, it allows me to go back one step and maybe explain why AIB came about. As I've said, we are closely linked to the European system, and the European system is based on European legislation. But as Jared pointed out, each country in Europe started by implementing the directive in which the instrument of the guarantee of origin is being defined in a very different way. So each country was at that point some sort of an island which was not interconnected with the rest of the geo markets in Europe. Well, we know that the electricity market and the electricity grid is more and more interconnected, and so AIB stepped up and created this rule book, this X system, as a way of ensuring that these markets would also be able to be interconnected. And as I've said, we've been able to do that by taking a technical role. We are not commercial, we are not political, we are purely taking a technical role, facilitating the market and making sure to exchange, that it's possible to exchange guarantees of origin in all of our member countries. Now, coming to the point about Spain, there still are some aspects which are being dealt with at the national level, some limitations or rules or things to take into consideration which still exist at the national level. And this is the case in Spain and in some other countries. So, for instance, if you want to export the GO out of Spain, you have to make sure at the time of issuance that it is being able to be exported. And on our website, the AIB website, we have a document clearly detailing all these national restrictions to trade, and I strongly encourage everyone to look at that document, which is in the public part of our website, to make sure that they know exactly what elements to take into account when moving into the geo market in a specific country.
Thank you, Dirk. And another question for you, asking if Serbia and Poland would join AIB anytime soon. Do you know anything?
Well, we have contacts with the countries in Europe which are not a member, and we are, of course, trying to motivate them to become members, because we feel that for Europe, for the consumers, this is a good development. I cannot go into details on each individual country, but I think it is also important to stress that it's very good that the market players, the consumers, the electricity suppliers, the producers of electricity from renewable sources in those countries also make clear that joining the AIB would be a good thing for them, enabling them to interact with the rest of Europe, and that would help us tremendously in getting these countries on board. But as I've said, in order to join the AIB, we need to make sure that all the rules are in place, both in terms of legislation at the national level, but also compliance with the EECS rules. And therefore, joining the AIB is a process which takes some time and maybe necessitates some changes in practices or in national law. And that can be difficult, but we are open to any contacts from countries which are not yet a member of the AIB.
Bernice, you can hear me now?
Oh, great. We have Jean-Pierre with us now. I'm happy you could join.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
thank you to the other panelists for answering the questions. In the meantime, we'll now go over to Jean-Pierre's presentation. So Jean-Pierre, let me just go on to your slide, and the floor is now yours.
Well, thank you. Sorry for my technical problems. So I had issues getting into the conversation, but I've been listening to you since the beginning. So I've heard my two previous partners. So from the origin point of view, I wanted to tell you a bit more also about the alternatives to corporate PPA. I don't know whether I'm able to change the slides myself, or if you have to change them yourself, Berenice. If you do, yes, please, yeah. So who is Origin? Just a few words about us so you understand which point of view I'm talking from. We are a consultancy and service company dedicated to helping corporate companies reaching their energy performance objectives, which means their CO2 reduction objectives, as well as their energy cost reduction objectives. And in order to do that, we work on energy efficiency, we work on self-generation of renewable energies, we work on energy purchase of renewable energy, basically through PPAs or through green energy. We'll come back to that in a minute. And we also work on storage and flexibility. And we do that from the definition of the corporate strategy all the way to the implementation of the solutions on site, whether they are energy efficient or renewable energy solutions. So let's talk about the topic today. Maybe first of all, I'd like to come back to the main reasons why our corporate clients decide to go towards renewable energy. I know there are some corporate companies here, so you'll probably find here the same motivation that you have. I've divided them in three topics. One is economic, and among the economics ones, one is the hedge against volatile energy prices. So the idea is as the price of the energy markets, and especially electricity markets, are completely unknown for the future, if I am able to fix a price for a long-term energy, renewable energy, either through a PPA or through a self-production, then I will know my price for that part of my energy for the next years. So that's one way, one reason for using renewable energy. And the second is competitivity issue, because a lot of companies are now finding out that it gives them a competitive advantage to be able to show to their clients that they are producing or using renewable energy. It can be, it is a clear competitive advantage for a lot of companies who are B2C companies, so it's like the luxury companies or the food industry companies, and but also in B2B, for example, in our last meeting on renewable energy organized by the Institute Origin that Berenice mentioned at the beginning, which is the non-profit organization that I'm also involved in. The survey team was explaining that Apple has chosen them among many other suppliers, and they are part of a preferred list of 17 suppliers who've committed themselves to producing all their products for Apple with renewable energy. So because they're produced with renewable energy, they have a competitive advantage compared to all the other suppliers of Apple. This can be also an issue for suppliers to IKEA, who, for example, decided to put the same kind of objectives to their suppliers, or to companies like Decathlon, who's also putting the same kind of objectives. So economic is the main reason, but there's another two ones. Brand leadership, make sure that I'm seen as a climate leader compared to my competitors. It's also a way of motivating employees, and Michelin people, for example, are very proud of the Michelin actions on renewable energy, as it was shared by the head of corporate responsibility of Michelin a few months ago in our last meeting on renewable energy. And it also improves the image towards clients and investors, as we've seen about clients earlier, but about investors. It's also important to understand that a lot of investors are now considering that the company they invest in and is acting on its environmental responsibility increases its value. And when the time comes for them to sell their shares, not only it's a question of how much profit this company makes, but it's also what kind of commitment they have in terms of environmental issues. And the last one is sustainability, corporate responsibility, reaching your sustainability goals, demonstrate your capacity of acting on carbon emissions, and also anticipate potential regulations and evolutions. So it's important to have these kind of motivation in mind, because then we'll define all the strategy for sourcing renewable energy when you are corporate. So what are the different ways of sourcing renewable energy? There are 4 of them that I've put on this slide. A couple of them, or most of them, we've already discussed. One is guarantees of origin. My colleagues have just spoken about them, so I won't go back on them. PPA is another one, and today we were talking about how to do it without using the PPA instrument, so I won't spend time on it. Utility green procurement is basically a very similar way of guarantees of origin. In one case, the guarantee of origin, you buy the guarantee of origin and you procure your energy from the grid. When you are buying green energy from the grid, you are basically buying the guarantees of origin at the same time and from the same supplier that you are buying your energy from. So these two are very similar. And the last one, which we mentioned earlier, but not as much, is self-consumption. So the solution here is that you produce your own energy and you consume it on site, and that's the fourth way. So if you compare them, and that's the next slide, in terms of advantages, I've put only 3 because guaranteed origin and green energy are very similar, as I said. So guaranteed origin, off-site corporate PPA, and on-site self-generation. Guaranteed origin, very simple to set up. You have no strong costs because there's no investment related. You just buy an attribute that shows that the energy you are consuming is from renewable source. The disadvantage of this approach is seen by some of our clients and more of our clients is first that there is very little additionality. A lot of guarantees of origin now in Europe especially are coming from existing assets, especially the hydro assets in the northern part of Europe. So when you buy guarantees of origin, you are using green energy, but you're not contributing to increasing the capacity for green energy in Europe, or at least not necessarily. It's not a very easy to communicate on guarantees of origin because it's a very conceptual thing. Basically, you are explaining that you are buying green energy, but you cannot show, or very often you do not show, where this energy comes from, although the guarantees of origin allow you to know the exact source. So some organizations are considering it as dangerous in terms of image because they think that it will be considered by a lot of observers as greenwashing. And guarantees of origin have a cost around €0.5 per megawatt hour to €1.5 per megawatt hour at the moment on the market. So this is not completely neutral. The other alternative is off-site corporate PPA. This is today we are talking about the alternatives to corporate PPA, so I won't spend much time on it. But 2 points on corporate PPA. One is it has the advantage of being able to contract any kind of size of power. So when you look at on-site PPA, you'll be limited, on-site generation, sorry, you'll be limited by the available space to install assets for renewable energy. For off-site PPA, obviously, there is no limitation. But the drawback of off-site PPA is that it's a complex negotiation and contracting. We can spend more time on off-site PPA, and I can answer a question later, but let's go to on-site self-generation. On-site self-generation has a great advantage. It's that it's a very visible on-site demonstration of your commitment. It increases the property value. At least this is seen in a lot of companies as a way of increasing the value of the assets, the buildings you have, or even the plants you have, because you are setting up a plant for procuring energy to whoever is operating the plant or the building. It is also similarly to corporate PPA way of fixing your energy price for the length of the investment, and now solar panels have a 25 years guarantee, so you know the price of your electricity for the next 25 years, at least the one you produce. And if you look at the average price of the electricity over 25 years, in most countries in Europe now, it's clearly under the average price of the current average price of electricity. Although, as we said earlier, we don't know what would be the price of electricity in 25 years' time. So this is not necessarily a sure bet. The drawback around self-generation is mainly, the first and main drawback is that you cannot usually produce as much energy as you need, especially on industrial plants, because the limited amount of space that you have to set up a photovoltaic plant, which is the main solution for on-site generation of green electricity, is usually too small compared to the amount of energy you like to spend. So it will only cover part of your need. And there are, as well as for the PPA, some consolidation issues and accountancy issues that have to be handled, and I can answer a question on this later. If we go to the next slide, just going down to the various solutions, I won't spend much time on this because my colleagues have already mentioned GEOs, RECs, and IRECs are all the similar systems, GEO for Europe, RECs for the US, and IRECs for the rest of the countries, and they basically are energy attributes. One thing I just want to add to what my colleague said is that GEOs are very good for electricity, and there's a market for GEO nearly all over the world now for RECs or IRECs, but there are hardly any guarantees of origin for biogas, which is the other kind of consumption that our clients have. So when I talk to an industrial company where usually the amount of energy spent in gas is as big or sometimes bigger than the electricity, and when they have an objective of CO2 emission, that's global objective, both for electricity and gas, obviously to have biogas GEOs would be very comfortable or very practical. But the amount of biogas GEOs is very limited to a few countries, and the prices are rather high. So that's one thing to keep in mind. GEOs are a good solution for electricity, not necessarily for gas. Let's go to the next one. On-site generation. So if we talk about electricity, mainly the on-site generation solution is solar. Although in some countries you're allowed, for example in Belgium, to put a wind turbine on a site at any distance from a building. In a lot of European countries, the distance regulations between buildings and wind turbines are too high for this solution to be installed on a site, and small wind turbines are too limited in power to produce any interesting amount of electricity. So basically, all our clients who go to on-site production for electricity will go to solar panels. And what's interesting in solar panels, which wasn't the case a few years ago, is that the prices have gone down so much in solar, basically from 600 euros per megawatt hour 10 years ago to around 50 euros per megawatt hour in Europe, and in some countries even lower. But they are competing now with the prices of grid electricity. If you're talking about an on-site project, you'll be slightly higher, and we'll see that in the next slide. But still, this is a profitable way of producing energy on-site. So let's have a look at prices on the next slide.
Yeah, so Jean-Pierre, just to let you know, we have very limited time for questions, so just to let you know, to kind of wrap up quite quickly the presentation, if you can.
Okay, so I'll just go fast. Is that what you saying to me, Bernice? Okay, so prices. I've got a couple of slides on this, so that's okay. Prices, you have here a map of Europe with different prices. You can see that they vary from around 50 euros per megawatt hour to 100 euros per megawatt hours. But this has to be compared to the total cost of electricity on site, which is usually more than the grid price, because you have to add, on the grid price, you have to add transport and taxes. On-site production, this is your final cost. And if you look at these prices and compare to the grid price in most countries, they are competitive in a lot of them. So that's what I wanted to say about on-site production. You have a solution that's worth looking at, but limited in amount in the capacity because of the limited space you have on site. Next slide, and I guess it's the last slide if I remember rightly. No, it's the one before last. Just wanted to point out that because if you are producing on site, it's not necessarily a capex issue. You can obviously, as a corporate company, invest yourself in the on-site solution, but a lot of clients, and nearly 90% of them, are using third-party financing, whereas someone else is financing the capex for them, and they will buy electricity from the on-site asset. So in the end, it's just supplying electricity on-site from someone else who's built and invested for you in that electricity and solar asset. And last slide, which I think is this time is the last, just a small comment on thermal energy, because when you talk about being 100% renewable, and if you're a corporate company, electricity is only one part, the other one is thermal energy. As I said, not many solutions in terms of buying geos of gas. So the other solution is producing on-site energy, thermal energy, which is by either moving to CHP or to biomass steamers. This is one solution that a lot of clients are using. The one would be to produce thermal energy on site by geothermal or thermal solar. And the last one, which is also developing quite fast, is participating to a common project between various sites producing renewable energy, for example, from garbage, and going through a steam network that's shared between different corporates. And this, in this case, is a PPA, a local PPA for buying steam from the local steam network. So if I summarize what I said, as a conclusion, you obviously have PPAs. You can add the guarantees of origin, and usually these two combine very well. The one solution that is also very important to look at is on-site production, whether it is thermal or electricity. And most of our mature clients are combining all three ways, producing what they can on site, then completing with PPA, and finally with geos. This was all I had to say very quickly, and now if you want to ask any question, I'm ready.
Great. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Thank you very much for that. So we have just a few minutes to answer a few questions. So we have received a lot of questions. I just wanted to say we will be publishing a write-up answering some more of your questions shortly after the webinar. But in the meantime, a few questions have come up quite often. The first one of them was, what is the role of blockchain in geos? So is that going to impact the geo market, and how? And is anyone already using blockchain in the geo market? So I don't know who wanted to go. Yeah.
Who do you want to answer?
Go for it, Dirk.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to pick up 2 points from Jean-Pierre's presentation. The negative points, so to speak, he mentioned about guarantees of origin. Additionality, GOs were never meant to be direct additionality instruments. They are meant as a tool for tracking in a reliable way. And thanks to the efforts of companies or campaigns like RE100, the demand is pushed up so high now for GOs that they are, through the market mechanism, indeed fueling new investments because they provide an attractive income to new producers for renewables. So additionality, it doesn't convince me. The second point about not being understood and difficult to communicate, I think the resource platform is a good example of a platform which has made GOs very well understood. And if you are now in a conference talking about corporate sourcing of renewables, 9 out of 10 speakers mention GOs in a very positive way, where 5 years ago this was probably 1 in 10 speakers. So I think we are quickly catching up to the arguments that Jean-Pierre mentioned as being negative for GOs. Last point, biomethane GOs, I absolutely agree. They are part of the clean energy package. They will be coming in a couple of years, and they are being developed as we speak. Now, to pick up your question on blockchain, Berenice, blockchain is, of course, a potential technology to base geosystems on, but the blockchain for now has not convinced any of our members that it is a silver bullet, and therefore our systems are very well regulated, and they are based on more traditional database systems, but they are audited, as I've said, and we are accountable for ensuring that we follow all the necessary security rules. So we might be looking at blockchain, or we are looking at blockchain. We might move to blockchain in a couple of years, but for now, it's not really a factor which is a concern to us.
Could I jump in there as well, just very quickly on this? Jean-Pierre, I also had a number of concerns with the presentation that you just gave. One of the concerns that I had was that you compared the guarantee of origin quite frequently as an or situation. And the guarantee of origin itself, just like all attribute tracking mechanisms, are foundational mechanisms. So they create the foundation of all electricity products on top of them. What this essentially means is you can purchase guarantees of origin, of course, alone. This is often termed unbundled, but it's also possible to bundle them. You mentioned this as well, through green tariffs or these other types of mechanisms, or through PPAs. That's also a form of bundling, but it remains the case that the guarantee of origin is the foundational instrument on which any claim is made. So it's not an or situation. If you don't have guarantees of origin in Europe, then you are not procuring renewable electricity. That's clear, and it's just an accounting instrument more than anything else. It's an accounting instrument before it is a market. It's a market as a secondary instrument, and of course that market is influenced by many factors, including location, supply, availability, all these other sorts of instruments. You said that the guarantee of origin has a specific price. I would disagree with you. The price of every guarantee of origin is very unique. In this case, you can see that the prices for guarantees of origin in the Netherlands are much, much higher for wind technology or solar technology than, for example, the price of guarantee of origin for hydroelectricity in France. So it is an individual product. It's not a commoditized mechanism as it was represented, and I think that's important to mention. When it comes to the blockchain discussions, I would also like to mention this very quickly. Blockchain is, of course, a very important and relevant technology. The most important aspect, and I'm sure there are people on the phone right now that are working with blockchain or potentially thinking about different blockchain mechanisms with the guarantee of origin. I very much support this, but I would also encourage you to solve one problem, and that is the GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Essentially, the way that the information is stored is, in my opinion, a little bit irrelevant, to be quite honest. I trust the national governments enough to store the information of the guarantee of origin, which I'm going to be using to create sell electricity to individual consumers. However, the information that's delivered to the national authorities has to be better than the national authorities are getting now. And then, of course, you're going to solve a number of different problems. The secondary barrier with blockchain is not necessarily with the technology itself, but is with existing legislation. Legislation is something that is restricting the market in a number of different areas. Dirk mentioned this as well when it comes to Spain, and blockchain will not necessarily solve this in the first instance. There's still going to be electricity market regulation, so we do need to think of a way to deal with that as well. That being said, these types of new technologies are things that we should be paying attention to and seeing if the future is going to be if a future guarantee of origin system is going to be better, more secure, more transparent, and more reliable with a blockchain system. If that is the case, then we should do it.
Bernice, let me just answer the 2 points that Dirk and Joanne mentioned on my presentation. First of all, I want to say that I'm not in favor or against guarantees of origin or in particular trying to push one solution rather than another. I agree with this. Guarantees of origin are a foundation tool to determine where the energy you're consuming comes from. When we talk, I think most of us of guarantees of origin, we think of the fact that we can also purchase these guarantees in a way that we change our energy mix into a green energy mix. So there is a market for guarantees of origin. Obviously, yes, it's the prices depend on the countries and the prices depend on the type of guarantees of origin. But a lot of companies who are now, for example, in RE100, claiming that they have or they will reach 100% renewable energy are using for that, and this is a good way of doing it. Guarantees of origin that they purchase to cover and to cover the electricity they consume. So that's one way. It's a good way, and it helps the development of renewable. But when I was mentioning that there is a limited additionality, this is not necessarily my own point of view. This is what our corporate clients are saying. Some of them are finding that guarantees of origin do not guarantee or do not necessarily mean additionality. They rather go for a PPA or for a self-generation because it is significantly.
My apologies, Jean-Pierre, but maybe it's the terminology. It's the terminology that you're using, in my opinion, because the guarantee of origin is a foundational instrument. Again, as I mentioned previously, and saying that it is the guarantee of origin that's the problem. It's not. It's the instrument that's the problem.
No.
It is the use of the guarantee of origin.
You're right.
It's the use of the guarantee of origin that is something that should be discussed, not the mechanism itself.
Exactly. No. And I'm not reproaching anything to the guarantees of origin. What I'm saying is that when you are covering your renewable, your electricity consumption by guarantees of origin by purchasing them, most of the guarantees of origin on the market at the moment in Europe are coming from existing assets, and a lot of these existing assets are hydro assets that have been working for more than 20 or 30 years. So a lot of our corporate clients are trying to find another alternative to guarantees of origin, which they are using happily for the moment, thinking, well, this is good, but not good enough because we would like to participate into the development of
Oh, hello. I think we lost Jean-Pierre. Okay. Well, thank you all. One very last question. We're running late, but we still have a very interesting question I really want to ask you. Hopefully, Jean-Pierre's line will get fixed very soon. So a couple of people have been asking about the potential risk that large corporates will claim access to the new lower cost resources and then leave the smaller customers kind of stuck with the higher cost resources. Understandable. Derek and Jean-Pierre is back. Did
Yes,
anyone?
yes, I was cut. I don't know what happened. I think so as a conclusion of what my point is, yes, I agree with Jared that guarantees of origin are an instrument. When I'm talking about, or when I was mentioning guarantees of origin, it was more the point of buying guarantees of origin on the market as a way of greening your energy. And as I say, a lot of corporate companies are finding that this is not enough, and they would like to participate in additionality by subscribing PPAs, which will have guarantees of origin associated, or by building their own on-site production, which will also have guarantees of origin as an attribute, but it's not just buying these guarantees from the market. And the last point I wanted to mention as well, as Dirk was commenting it, is that obviously guarantees of origin are a good way of greening your energy, but they are seen also by some corporate, and this is not again origin talking, as a way of not being as explicit, an explicit commitment to renewable energy as they find on-site production is, because on-site production you can show photos, you can have clients visiting, you can prove very clearly that you are using green energy, which is much more understandable by the general public than the concept of guarantees of origin, which is also very clear for corporate buyers, but not necessarily for the general public. And again,
keep in mind, Jean-Pierre, that guarantees of origin are also given for on-site deliveries at some point in time, depending upon where the location of the meter is. So again, it goes back to this accounting instrument. It's about the accounting instrument, and on-site deliveries are not separate from the guarantee of origin. So I just think that, again, we need to change our language as market players sometimes, and market players should do their best to inform clients as well about the origin of these mechanisms, the purpose of these mechanisms, and exactly what it means to use these mechanisms in specific ways. And I definitely agree with you that a guarantee of origin is not additional. It's also not additional. It's essentially just a mechanism for different claims and different uses of different technologies. But again, it's for market players to explain that to their clients as well, not just to discuss it in this way, I think, at some time.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much. So shall we address that last question about large corporates kind of claiming access to new lower cost resources and leaving smaller customers stuck with higher cost resources? That's a question that came back as well. Did anyone have anything to answer to this question?
I think it's a very interesting question, but it would take a long time to go into the details. I think pretty much what you said, Berenice, at the beginning is very much true. Different types of corporate consumers have different needs, and there are different strategies to fulfill these needs. So it is up to each a corporate consumer to find the right strategy or mix of strategies that they want to apply. And I also agree with Jared, the GO in Europe is the basis for all of these strategies. So let's make sure that more and more people understand this and help them to implement sustainable solutions.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we are running late, so thank you very much to all of you panelists and to everyone for attending this webinar that we are holding again ahead of the first Corporate Energy Network. So we will be publishing a write-up of this webinar and try to answer some of the questions we have received and haven't had time to answer today. And do not hesitate to visit our website, corporatecleanenergy.com. You can register, and we're also looking for speakers at the moment. So if you have case studies that you think will be interesting for our audience, please do. Thank you very much again to everyone, and see you very soon.